Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm going to talk today principally about the Southbank Centre as a case study, really. But before I do that, I'm going to set some context for why I think the Southbank Centre is an interesting case study. And I've called my talk Reinventing the Wheel because I was at the Southbank Centre 20 years ago in a slightly different role. And as Corinne says, I left and went to the Barbican and then became a consultant for 5 years. I would have never have thought, going back to the Southbank Centre 18 months ago, that somewhere could have changed so much, so fundamentally changed from what I left behind. And so I think it's probably one of the best case studies I could give you to qualify the bit that I'm going to talk about first, which is about how the arts in the UK have responded to the cuts that have faced them. So, on that note, let's go back in time. I'm going to take you back in time, 9 o'clock in the morning. We need to go back and think about the UK art scene sort of 30, 40 years ago. In the 50s, 60s and 70s in the UK, the arts were well funded. We had pretty much a tell and sell culture. We put it on. If you came, great. If you didn't, well, we didn't really care. So actually, you know, the skills of arts marketing and arts philanthropy, fundraising, didn't exist. And really, we have in our professional lives to thank this lady now for giving us the careers we all crave. Because Margaret Thatcher in the 80s started the process of cutting the arts. And I sort of make the point because although at the moment the arts are still going through terrible cuts and difficulties, certainly in the UK, this is not a new phenomenon. And we have been preparing ourselves and dealing with that for some time. So as difficult as it may be to thank Margaret Thatcher for something, you know, at least it's given me a career to focus on. So the current situation we find ourselves in, it's still grim in the UK, not to be too downbeat about it. There was a 36% cut in funding to the Arts Council from government between 2009 and to date. And on top of the central funding cuts, one of the biggest impacts in the UK is the local authority, the regional cuts to local authority grants. On average, across the UK, it's been about 28%, which is devastating enough as it is. But in some cases, for example, in Newcastle, there's been a 100% cut in arts funding to regional theatres from local authorities. Absolutely devastating cuts going on. And overall in the UK, there's been about a 22% reduction in Arts Council funded organisations. So it's a tough challenge for the UK, and I know we're not alone in that. So in order to deal with that, there's been a lot of talk in the last few years about something called adaptive resilience, which I think is the principle I want to share with you today, because when we come to look at the Southbank Centre, I hope you'll see the Southbank's a good example of this in practice. Now, adaptive resilience was something the Arts Council talked about a few years ago, and it's still resonating today. The current CEO of the Arts Council, Darren Henley, recently referred to English National Opera, who are going through some tough times at the moment, and talked about them needing to be resilient, to be responsive and adaptive to change. So this principle of adaptive resilience is about being really true to your core purpose, really holding firm what you believe in, but having the ability to absorb change with integrity, which I think is quite a good word there. And I was thinking, well, actually, that's quite a dry statement. How do I try and make more sense of this? So I actually thought this was quite a good way of looking at it. So, you know, it's not the strongest species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the most responsive to change. So I'm sure Darwin didn't think about the arts when he was making that comment. But it's quite, it sort of sums up that spirit. Now, so as a consultant in the last few years before I joined the Southbank, these were some of the clients I worked with in that time. And they were all characterised by a desire to want to change or want to evolve their business model. Every single one of these organisations were seeking to either reinvent themselves or to think differently about what they did and how they did it. And in some cases, such as West Kowloon, great project to be involved in because they were starting from scratch. So you could sort of talk to them about how they would approach something with a blank sheet of paper. So I just thought within this list, there's a few examples that I would perhaps talk about which illustrate adaptive resilience in my view. One is the Barbican. Now, I was at the Barbican for nearly 10 years as Director of Marketing Development and Digital. In that time, we were undergoing cuts, and we tried to adapt in a variety of different ways. So one such way was we started to merge our back-end functions, such as finance, HR, with other cultural organisations nearby. So we were delivering cost savings by working together smarter. I ended up creating an agency. My marketing department, I began to sell it. I was ruthless, I had to get the money in, so I started to sell the services of the marketing function. And we began working on behalf of smaller arts organisations who couldn't afford the resources that we had. So started to generate income streams there. English National Ballet, another great example. They really needed to reposition themselves. They were up against the Royal Ballet in London, and it was very hard to differentiate really between the two, except one had more money than the other. So a major rebranding project, really repositioning the organisation. But on top of that, I urged them to think about where they were performing. They had been for 50 years based at the London Coliseum, and I asked them to question whether or not actually, given the direction of travel for their programme, was that the best venue for them to be in? Was that the place where the new audiences of the future for them was going to be? And I had a famous row with Tamara Rocco, the artistic director, who was fantastic. And we came to an arrange, said, if you think I'm going to take this company out of the Coliseum, she said, you're very much mistaken. And I said, well, you're paying me to be a consultant. I'm going to say what I think, and this is what I think. And to her credit, we talked it through, and they've now moved away from the Coliseum to Sadler's Wells and partly the Barbican as well. So, and they've unlocked a whole new audience base as a result of that move. National Gallery, I worked with them on a whole project with a whole organisation, talking about what would the gallery of the future be? How would digital technology transform an organisation such as the National Gallery? And with Opera North, rebranding, yes, thinking about their performing patterns, thinking about their touring schedules, changing their contracts with the chorus and orchestra so they could embrace digital more. And with both EMB and Opera North, helped them to experiment whether broadcasting into cinemas was a right move for them. And it wasn't, actually. It's probably a subject of a different speech than today, but it wasn't for them. But it's all about trying new things. So if I had to summarise the characteristics of the organisations I've just talked about, I think resilient organisations, in my view, remain ambitious. You have to set long-term goals and ambition. You have to have a clear vision for the future, and your brand position has to be really very strong. Brand strategy is absolutely vital. But I think you have to question everything. I think times are tough. You have to say, how can we do things differently? How might we change? There are no sacred cows, whether it be artistic, operational or commercial. Every organisation I worked with as a consultant, we looked under every single stone in the organisation and said, actually, there's nothing that we do currently that we couldn't do differently, or we couldn't stop, or we couldn't expand. So that was another key learning, I think I would say, in terms of resilience. And the final, most important thing I would say is that you should think the unthinkable. 5 years ago, 10 years ago in the UK, arts organisations would never have dreamed of doing some of the things they're now doing. Working with partners, working with what may have been seen as competition in the past. They are now actively working together, collaborating, being creative and adaptive going forward. So I think the unthinkable is something I would always urge you all to do. So having set the scene about adaptive resilience and the principles of how organisations need to adapt to survive, I'm going to turn to the Southbank Centre, because by chance, having gone back there 18 months ago, I discovered this organisation had gone through quite a remarkable process of change. And it was actually change that was started by Michael Lynch, who I know many of you may know from Australia, who was the chief exec at the time and started a big period of refurbishment for the site and understood the potential and the importance of commercial and income diversification on the site. So that was one key pillar of the change that went on at the Southbank. Changing and exploiting the site, looking at opportunities for more retail, catering and so on. But the other big change is the spirit of the Southbank Centre, what we stand for. And I'm going to show you some interesting pictures, well I think they are anyway, but rediscovering the heritage of the Southbank. The Southbank Centre stands on the site that was bombed very heavily in the war. I'm led to believe these are pictures of the area at that time. Now, post-war, there was a spirit, again, of resilience, I think, and the Festival of Britain in 1951 was a major turning point for the UK. The government wanted everyone to feel better about themselves, to have belief in the future, to show adaptive resilience, I guess you might say. So on this site here, you can just about see the festival hall in the top quadrant there, but there's some other wonderful futuristic buildings, the Dome of Discovery, which looks like the Millennium Dome today. Wonderful structures called the Skylon and lots of other things going on there. So not much of that original scene remains today apart from the Southbank Centre. But at the time, over a third of the population of the UK went to this Festival of Britain, this festival of hope and of discovery. After that, though, the Southbank Centre, certainly when I was there before, had become defined by its buildings. We were the Royal Festival Hall, we were the Queen Elizabeth Hall, we were the Hayward Art Gallery. The logo at the time, the logo has gone through many iterations over the years, but the logo at the time focused on the names of the buildings. We were defined by physical structures. So I think now the change, I say, is that we've gone back to the roots, that festival heritage, the belief that sort of born the Festival of Britain, that spirit of resilience. So our mission now is about believing the arts have the power to change lives, transform lives, and that most importantly, the arts should be available to everyone, ideally free. So this spirit of festivals, festivals for the world, is now this message that underpins the Southbank Centre. We are no longer defined by buildings, we're defined by a mission, by a desire to try and do good, to try and change the people we engage with. But festivals don't just live inside buildings. I'm going to show you sort of some of the transformation on site. This is David Sefton. It was good to meet up with an old colleague who will remember some of these pictures from when we were both there a long time ago. But we remember these pictures. The river is on the right-hand side of the front of the building there. Some awful service road there you can see. It's pretty grim. At the back of the building, the utopian walkways of the future. You can see one there looking pretty sorry for itself. Get the bulldozer out. And on the roof of the Queen Elizabeth Hall, somebody had a vain attempt to put some nice concrete chairs in there, but failing miserable. So it's not very good. So if you look at where we went, so the front of the building now, look at it today, this absolute transformation. We were, as part of the refurbishment of the site, as part of this spirit of festival that we wanted to create on site, the place is now teeming with shops, with bars, with pop-up restaurants, with things for people to do, places for people to gather and to meet. And we often, regularly, certainly in the summer, see thousands of people coming onto the site. At the back of the building, where you used to have the utopian walkway, we now run a food market every Friday, Saturday and Sunday. We encourage young entrepreneurial chefs and so on to start their businesses here, and it's always very popular. On the roof of the Queen Elizabeth Hall, we've now transformed it into a garden, and we were voted London's best rooftop bar because we have a bar on top of the garden here, which brings in untold income to the centre. The site is generally buzzing by day and night. We have fountains by Yepperheim, which in the summer bring people in their thousands to the South Bank. We have a fake beach that we put out, which brings families to the South Bank. People always know there's something going on at the Southbank Centre. At Christmas, we bring the place to life with winter markets, with festivals, food festivals. We have carousels, we have Spiegel tents and all manner of things going on. Wagamama converted a shipping container, and this is their most profitable branch. Who'd have thought an old shipping container could make a wonderful restaurant? And that little ice cream van there brings in £500,000 over 5 weeks in the summer on the South Bank. There's money and ice cream. So I say all that because those commercial things, that whole model of enlivening the site, means that we want people to come to the South Bank not because of the art, but because they know there's something going on. Many people, if you said, let's go to an arts centre, would say the arts are not for me. They would feel a barrier. They would have what we call threshold fear. If you transform an arts centre into a cultural centre, a place where cultures can meet, where people can come together, have a good time, have something to eat, to drink, to talk, then there's a chance they will bump into art. And this strategy of providing opportunities for people outside of the physical buildings to bump into art has proven very good for the South Bank. So, a lot of what we do is free. We have innovative, participative programs. We use the whole 21-acre site for what we do. We really believe in placemaking as a strategy. We have probably one of the most diverse audience bases, particularly BAME audience bases, of any arts organisation in the UK, because the programme is designed to support that ambition. So we do lots of festivals. We were born out of a festival in 1951, and now we've returned to that route. Our brand has returned to the heritage. So these are just some of the festivals we do. A big one we do is Women of the World, and it's actually been here, I believe, to Brisbane and Melbourne in the past. It's been to India, Pakistan, it's been to Harlem in New York, to Washington. We've just been asked to tour this festival around every Commonwealth country over the next 5 years. Alchemy, a festival of Indian Asian arts, Africa Utopia, Imagine, Children's Festival, Being a Man. We have festivals that look at subjects such as urban art. We have Changing Minds. It was a recent festival about mental health, which sold out incredibly in a week. And it was a mixture of concerts featuring music by, for example, Schumann or composers who were known to have issues with mental health. And we overlaid that with talks, debates, and it was a really moving festival. Who'd have thought you could make a festival about mental health? But I'll come on to this later, but it unlocked new funding streams as well, because we were attracting people who were seeing something different in the programme. Disability, power, other festivals we have throughout the year. So the story today is that we have about 31 million people coming onto our site every year. We programme ourselves 5,000 events, and we issued 6.4 million tickets. At the moment, 50% of what we programme is free, and our ambition is to increase that even further. And we are the UK's third most popular visitor destination. Now, this doesn't come without its challenges. I would be wrong to say that this is all a sort of walk in the park. We undoubtedly have stretch within the organisation. The volume of what we do creates a stretch on the resource, and we're wrestling with that now. We need the volume of activity to drive the footfall. People buying coffees are as important to us as somebody buying a ticket in the Royal Festival Hall, because that coffee subsidises a free ticket for somebody who wouldn't normally come to the arts. So we need to keep the volume of activity going on. We're getting international interest. I'll come on to that in a second. Some core traditionalists have hated what we've done. The sort of white middle-class classical music brigade have said, how dare you do this to our lovely site? We want this to be a concert hall, a temple for classical music. And we have struggled with some of those people who have rejected the approach we've taken, despite us saying, actually, this new income stream means we can get young people into classical concerts for free. Isn't that a good thing? But actually, some people just don't like that. In terms of reviewing the arts, most reviewers in the press operate in silos. You might get dance critics or music critics, theatre critics. The festival strategy is very hard to quantify and review, so we've struggled to get reviewers understanding that approach now. But I must say the tide is turning. There was a major piece in The Guardian in the UK recently that said, they basically said, we get it now. Jude Kelly, the artistic director, has been vindicated. For many years, people didn't understand, but they now get it. Managing the on-site experience. We actually have a crowd control manager now, which is great. And we've had the inevitable, you can't do that, you shouldn't do that. Well, why not? If it's creating new art, it's reducing our reliance on subsidy and so on. So this is a very complex slide, I won't dwell too long. But essentially the commercial income, the green line, shows in the last 5, 6, 7 years, you know, the extent of that. On the right-hand side, the column is income by millions, and on the left-hand axis is footfall. So you can see that the blue bars are the annual site footfall coming onto the site. And the purple line is commissioned from one of our catering suppliers. So overall, a really good picture of health. And we are attracting from a sponsorship and commercial model, lots of new interests. These are just some of the commercial partners we work with. We've got a queue of shops and restaurants wanting to come onto our site, into our spaces as they become free. Wagamama, the branch on the Southbank, is their busiest site in the UK. We have partnerships with people like Adabelli and Soiree, who I know will be familiar here, and more commercial partnerships, NatWest, MasterCard, year-long partnerships with us, because what we do now is much more attractive to sponsors. They either like the fact that we are a festival, we're about good time, they like the fact the themes of our festivals sometimes are slightly different, that gives them an opportunity to engage with CSR issues, or in some cases, like mental health, we're attracting new partners who would never normally think of sponsoring the arts, but who would be interested in the subject matter of what we're doing. So it is giving us a chance to reach out to new new partners. Going forward, we're now seeing incredible interest in this model internationally. We've just won a £1 million grant from the Nordic Council. This is Finland, Sweden, Iceland, and so on, who are buying into the festival approach. Now, what they're not saying is, here's £1 million, change your programme to be all Nordic. They want us to keep doing exactly everything we're doing, but to try and weave in some of their artists throughout the year. China have just given us £800,000 to feature some of the Chinese artists going through. And we don't take this money if there's any expectation that we change our core value or ethos. But what we're seeing more and more is our organisations buying into the model of festivals. We're also being asked to act as consultants. For example, the city of Warsaw, I went out there recently. They have a big public square in the middle of the city, which is not animated at the moment. They're looking at the Southbank model. They say, how can we animate our city in the way that you do on the Southbank? We've been approached by landowners in London who want to animate public squares, and we're offering a sort of white label consultancy service to them to show them how they might enliven the space. Our retail expansion, we're getting much more interest in our brand now because of the messaging, the festival strategy, and we're reaching out regionally now. We're getting grants now to take our festivals on tour around the UK. All of this gives us many, many more opportunities to work with sponsors, with partners, with trusts, foundations. Individuals are now approaching us who, again, would not normally be attracted by a pure arts programme, but who might be interested in the nature and the content of what we're doing. So in the spirit of the, oops, going the wrong way, sorry. I know we like key learnings, so here we are. So I would say, if I were encouraging you to sort of think about what I've just said, how resilient are you at the moment? How resilient will you be in the future? In achieving resilience, how adaptable are you prepared to be? Even the most established ways of working can be changed. I've seen it big time at the Southbank Centre, but I also saw it in some of those other clients I work with as a consultant. I would say be bold, think big, be visionary. But if you don't have a core brand, if you're not true to your core vision, and again, I think the Southbank's an interesting model in that they went back to their roots 60 years ago and rediscovered that core vision, which now holds good for them. So work on your brand. Think about your brand strategy, your vision, values, and mission. And I think change can and should unlock new revenue and support opportunities which you could exploit. But I think my biggest key learning for you is think the unthinkable. It can happen, it can change, and yes, you will always get people to say, you shouldn't do that, you can't do that. Well, you can do that if you want to. So hopefully that's given you a bit of inspiration, and thank you for listening.